My name is Christopher Lutterodt-Quarcoo, CLQ for short. I'm a designer, director, writer and speaker. I'm the founder of Unmateralised, which is an archive that investigates the cradle of the narrative, beliefs and systems that shape us as individuals, but also define society. Graduating in 2016 from the Royal College of Art is looked at as one of the highest or levels of prestige in which you can get. Ironically, I've voted the best design and art school in the world 3 times in a row. What that comes with is realizing its heritage, coming from Charles Darwin and I believe his grandson being the chancellor or the chairman of the school. Because it's been so successful, there's a lot about it that doesn't seem like it has to change or to encompass a large variety of individuals or cultures or people. There was an interesting article. It said that the RCA is becoming a finishing school for the East. Now, what that is saying is that it's inviting international students which are being charged for excess levels, but the working class people that in the UK that are made up of the diaspora and living here aren't present in the institution or are very, very minuscule. At one point, I remember myself being, I think, 1 of 5 quote unquote African Caribbean students in the building at one time. And there's also a hierarchy in terms of appreciation of design or ability or cultural kind of excellence. And for me, that's a hard thing to deal with. I was born in the UK, but I lived in Africa in the beginning of my life. Living in Senegal, traveling to Yemen, Egypt, Cameroon, Kenya. I've seen the excellence in their academic work, if we look at their knowledge, but also how that linked to their design culture. They were one and the same. And when you bring that over, there's an exoticism that comes in. It goes, oh, it's nice for those kinds of people. But there are many examples where that ingenuity in those nations or in those spaces were far more advanced or form the foundation of the information and data that they're passing down in that institution. So decoloniality is a very serious thing, but for the institution, they're not necessarily realizing what their wisdom is based on first. And then for people like me who may bring it in and say, this is the excellence that exists elsewhere, it's like you have to put it in an African context, so it's in that category. Don't get me wrong, there are times where it doesn't necessarily do it, but it has to be fought for. And it's a tiring process. Academia is a very dangerous environment. It can either be and that causes either you to thrive and to craft that path that you want to take, or you become part of that ecosystem and fuel its own agenda. It either consumes you or you use it. You use it as fuel. At its best, it's a fertile soil that allows emergent designers, practitioners, researchers to create new ways or new forms of thinking, to usher in alternative ways of creation and methodologies. But at its worst, it can become this abyss of arguments of absolutes, where someone believes they have the entire answer for something, and then you've got this never-ending debate where it's tiresome. You get this neighbor where people go back and forth, but then as you look at progress and what's been generated, it's not necessarily there. It can stifle the growth of these individuals, which is unfortunate. In my opinion, academia needs to become a testbed. It needs to embrace failure in every sense of the word and question what it is that is developing the students and the lecturers for. So to put it into slightly more specific context, it's about putting things together, ingredients together that have never been tested before. It's about testing philosophies and ideologies that may be, yes, a couple 100 years old, but seeing whether what has been spawned from that or built on top of that is actually the correct philosophy to build on. Is that, we acknowledge it happens, but does it necessarily serve its place for the mentality that we have today, for the sake of progress? Those philosophies existed in that space under a particular ethos. What's the version of that, or how does it get taken and put into this context now? What does that mean for its students? What does that mean for the communities or the agendas that it can be applied to now? This is what's interesting. People believe they go to educational institutions to find answers. I completely disagree. I believe you go there to learn how to craft the right question, because institutions are, in that sense, are looked at as being a great environment to question what's already there and what can be done better. So there's several questions being asked. I'm suggesting that we try and find that one question in every topic or every event that can paralyze people who are an automatic, that instinctive defense of protecting what's already there. Because that question alone can paralyze an individual, and it has a long-lasting effect. The aftertaste of a question can be incredibly bitter or sweet, and that is what leads to change and impact to someone on the inner core. It's not a popular opinion, however, I believe that answers are inefficient and extremely limited, because what they provide is a potential solution for right now and then, not necessarily finding the root cause of that question in that time. I'm not sure if answers provide a ground for growth. I believe they provide a temporary mechanism of coping. I need this, where can I get it? Here. Does that necessarily solve the problem that will, if it will arise again, or how to operate without that answer? And I think, unfortunately, when we're looking at efficiency in capitalism, this is where answers are the most valued. Questions can be efficient, but at that point we also need to appreciate the process in which they emerge. The way that design for me makes a great impact in the decoloniality in education is that it does three key things. It helps discover new methodologies for within the safe testbed of an educational institution to be implemented into society. What that means is that there's an opportunity to bring community into the development of that process and design with them in order to impact people on a larger scale. Secondly, it allows the democratization of information and knowledge. So that means no matter your educational level, everyone can be aware of what the parameters are, what are the limitations, what are the possibilities. This is something that people are missing. This is the issue with politics to some kind of degree. Not everyone understands the technical terminology, but design is that way where you can simplify language and show people the experience. And lastly, it gives you the opportunity to look at things in new ways. There's nothing clearer than an image, in my opinion. Words are beautiful in crafting this elaborate kind of ideology, but an image can tell you there and then what is going on or how to act. And I think this is where design is doing something that politics and legislation can't, because it can rally people that would never be friends. It can highlight an issue and empathize with multiple people at the same time that you just can't do with necessarily words. And that has been evidenced over and over again. You're looking at protests that are being brought up by a single image, photography. You're seeing people rally around a phrase that has been designed as a term. There's a great history of protest and design. Present in Kenya, present in France, also in South Africa, another place which is incredible in what's going on in terms of design and the arts in terms of legislation. What design is able to do is cut out the bureaucracy and the nonsense. I feel when you come from a different background, when you have different inspirations or different references, you have no choice but to educate. And not everybody's up for that. Fortunately, I am in that case, and I was built in that manner, but I think I was challenged because not everyone understood what the vision was or what I was trying to do. What I guess my failing was at that point was, in a sense, I became the teacher and they became the student, so I had to build up their level of competence and understanding. which unfortunately that infrastructure doesn't allow for. The challenge for making what I do better comes down to me wanting to improve step by step, and then testing on one individual step. You're from this background and you have this kind of information. What's your immediate response? I won't say anything. What do you think? Testing on another person. Does it hit with the people that I want to engage with? And if you look at the makeup of the institution, this is where you start to realize who is the audience that is being pitched at. When we exist or operate within well-established institutions that are from European descent, what we're saying is that institution was built on key principles. If we are coming in, and I say we as whether being African Caribbeans or people or Asian community, anyone that's not necessarily European with a different ideology comes in, what we have to realize is that they have many, many, many years of a consistent mindset where it comes from. We are going to struggle in changing their foundation. So you're left with two choices. One, you put the medicine in the candy and you create this kind of hybrid and sneak in your information. To use pop culture as a reference, Beyonce is a great example of that. On the other hand, you create your own institution or your own establishment in order to educate, which is where you may get someone as blatant as maybe Kendrick Lamar or Ras Kass in terms of like music, if you want to use that example, where they say it as it is very clearly and say we will do and establish what we need to make what we need to happen. I believe that as a community, the non-European community, what we're uncommitted in is saying we don't need you and we can build by ourselves. That comes down to the inferiority complex that's happened over generations. How far or how long we have to wait for that to go, I don't know. But I can honestly say for people in my age group and a bit older, they're realizing that now. They're realizing that the education system isn't necessarily, it might make you book smart, but it's not benefiting the culture of the individual. The individual themselves is slightly compromised. And they realize that that is the priority, that is the special thing that allows them to grow with ethics and guidelines that allow them to pass on to the next generation. It starts at home. Let those institutions be where they are. Build your own and kill it off from your home completely. You ask about what is the role of a designer in the diaspora. Let's address that question in a slightly different context. What in this world is not designed? In fact, what in this world is not considered? The answer is nothing. When you look at the role of a designer, you're looking at one key principle or one key question. Where does your allegiance lie? After you answer that question, you start to define in which way you can make your contribution. Are you operating in retribution? Are you operating as a liberationist? Are you operating as a disruptor? Or are you operating in terms of conservation? These are the roles that I've been able to identify as general themes. There may be others, but it does come down to that root word and that root question. Where does your allegiance lie and what is your contribution? What is the role of design beyond protest? We're seeing design being used to rally individuals, to state a point, but what I believe we're missing or we're getting to is what happens when the designer takes a seat at the table? This is where things start getting interesting because we're talking about design and humanities now joining forces. You're talking about design and politics, you're talking about design and archaeology, you're talking about design and the individual, design and the community, designing for humanity beyond objects and products. If designers start moving to this role in terms of adjusting legislation, bringing people into the process, listening to them and creating unique custom things, what you start to realize is that any form of decision or any kind of plan becomes very nuanced. It starts to pick up the forgotten voices. it starts to add a fresh perspective into areas that have been overlooked or not been paid attention to at all. There are questions that designers will ask in organizations that the organizations themselves have not even thought about. This is what happens when designers move in, because we think about engagement in the form of interaction. We think about, how would this person approach something? How do they feel when they do something? Have they been pushed or instigated to move? Do we just have to leave them alone? This is what designers bring into politics. And this is something that I feel that's going to grow. It's been in murmurings for the past, 8 years, but it hasn't necessarily fully blossomed. In my opinion, there's nowhere that's grooming or nurturing that kind of inquisition at this moment in time. And it's time that happens. It's interesting, when you look at organizations that are looking at people or humanity and design, something interesting is happening. At Unmateralised, we believe that there's a great questioning or great investigation that's occurring when you look at the people, look at the things that surround them and what forms their decisions, their beliefs, the systems that they want to put their trust in. Unmateralised is a unique space because what it does, it doesn't make an effort to change your thoughts. What it is doing specifically is picking at the narratives, the beliefs, the systems in which you put your unquestionable faith in. And what it does through every experience, and whenever you see one of the pieces of work, you read one of the papers, you submit your own instigation of inquiry, is that it leaves you with one simple thing, one simple question: what do I believe? Because what we're doing is that we are taking the techniques that are used to, that were originally used to create a piece of omission, a void, or an inaccuracy in the quote-unquote factual narrative. And we are emulating that process, because I don't believe in this case you need to fight fire with water. If I can show you how it's done, that puts doubt in everything that is built around you. And doubt for me is the most incredible tool and most powerful piece of equipment ever. Because if you enter doubt into someone's belief, they have to rip it down to its foundation and rebuild it. So once we've created doubts, in the future what I would like to see is people submitting or being able to identify omissions, voids and inaccuracies themselves and raising the flag. I would then like to see that flag transition into an area of cases where we build a case of plausible doubt. And that case of plausible doubt is where we can pull on evidence and see, where does this narrative belief or system not make sense or deter from the original narrative? And then that then goes into what we like to call, we like to build as a jury room of deliberation. Key individuals that can start looking at the ramifications of those omissions, voids or inaccuracies. When we can discuss what the ramifications are of these narratives, beliefs or systems, we can then see its growth, its impact on a person-to-person scale, its community, its society. We can start identifying how we treat one another, but more importantly, we can see how those things were created, because now we have the criteria. We understand how this was done to narratives that impact our lives. And then we can spot, there's something not right here. That doesn't quite match up. You can't pull the wool over our eyes twice. Typically, when people come out of an unmaterialized piece of work or read one of their papers or engage in one of our discussions, they're left in a quite a beautiful but awkward silence, because they're unsure of the foundation in which they stand on now. They're questioning, is this real or is this false? Is this fact or fiction? How much of what I believe is fact or fiction? There's this inquiry that's now in the back of their mind, constantly going. They want to understand, how do they come to believe what they see? And that's where we know we've had a successful encounter.